Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you. My name is Hannah and I'm from OASES.
And my name is Joanne, also from OASES.
And we're really excited to welcome you to the ECO2 Smart Schools Climate Conference today. We're just going to have a few minutes to let all the schools join. So we're really interested to know who is here. So if you could share your school name and country name in the chat, and you can do that by clicking on the little Q&A button in the top right-hand corner and typing it in, and then we'll be able to see who is there. And to mute notification sounds, which we recommend that you do, because otherwise every time someone posts in the chat, you'll get a little ping. If you click on 3 little dots in the top right-hand corner and scroll down to mute notifications, you should be able to do that. The conference is also being recorded, so don't worry if you miss any bits. We'll pop them on YouTube later as well and share the link with you.
And if you lose the feed at any point in time, don't worry, because as Hannah's just said, you can see it later by going onto our website or going onto the YouTube link. And if you lose the link and need to come back, please hit the live button so that you join us in real time.
And if you are sharing any pictures of the conference, of you taking part, please use the hashtag ECO2COP27, like you can see here on the screen, and we'll put that in the chat as well.
Okay, I think we've had our first school join us, Hannah.
We have. So hello to BCCIS East in Cairo, Egypt. It's great to have you on board.
Okay, so if you are just joining us, if you pop your school name and your country into the chat, and we're just going to announce you and let everybody know who's here today.
And just a reminder, if you've joined us, you might want to mute the notification sounds, because otherwise you'll get a ping every time someone posts in the chat. So to do that, click on the 3 little dots in the top right-hand corner and scroll down and click mute notification sounds. And if you have just joined us, please share your school name and country in the chat by clicking on the Q&A button and typing it in so we can see who is here.
And we have CM High School just joined us. Welcome, CM. Okay, so if you lose the feed at any point in the conference, don't worry, but when you rejoin, please hit the live feed so that you join us in real time.
And hello to Futures Hurghada Language School from Egypt as well. It's great to see you here. So if you are sharing anything on social media from the conference, please use the hashtag ECO2COP27 so we can see what you've been up to.
Okay, the conference is being recorded, so don't worry if you miss any bits. You will be able to access it through our website and our YouTube channel.
Just have a minute or so to let schools join. So if you have just joined us, please let us know who you are. So pop your school name and your country in the chat by clicking on the Q&A button in the top right-hand corner, like the one you can see on the screen, and typing it in.
Okay, there's been more than 100 schools have joined in the prep for this conference, and we had a fantastic attendance yesterday. So we're hoping for another fantastic attendance this morning. So if you are just joining us, please put your school name and country into the chat, and we can then announce you and let everybody know that you're here.
Okay, so we're going to begin the conference now. If you lose the feed at any point in time, please just hit the live button when you return so that you can join us in real time.
And to start the conference, we have Richard Hurst from Durham County Council, who's going to tell you a little bit more about what we're going to be doing today.
I'm Rich Hurst. I'm Education Advisor for Sustainability for Durham County Council. I'm one of the organisers of this year's live conference, and I'm delighted that you're able to join us this morning. And this is the second year that we've run these international school events supported by Durham County Council, OASES and Durham County Council. And just to remind you, as Joanna and Hannah pointed out, we are recording this session and we will make it available via the OASES YouTube channel and the ECO2 Smart Schools website a little later. So these These events are part of the ECO2 Smart Schools programme, which helps schools in North East England to reduce their carbon emissions and for them to learn more about energy and climate change. And it's part of Durham County Council's Climate Emergency Response Plan. And the target for the County Council is to reach net zero emissions by 2045 for the whole of the County of Durham. So today's session for you will be a mix of presentations, questions for you to answer in some polls, and also, most importantly, the chance for you to ask questions of our expert panel made up of representatives from Durham University and Durham County Council. And for this year's session, we're focusing on the impact of climate change on habitats and ecosystems. So we'll be finding out more about how climate change is affecting many of the habitats around the world through the climate losses section. And then after that, we'll be exploring solutions that are available to people right now around the world. And then we'll be looking at climate hopes, where we'll be asking you to pledge what you're going to do in your own communities and your own schools to be able to reduce carbon emissions and to help to combat climate change. I really do hope that you enjoy this morning's session. And now I'll hand back over to Joanne and Hannah to learn more about climate losses. Thank you, Joe.
Hi. Thank you, Richard, for that introduction. Okay, we are now going to look at some of the work that you have been completing on climate losses.
So I'll start with Dar Al Tabia from Egypt, and students from Dar Al Tabia shared that their local ecosystem in Egypt is a desert, and animals such as camels live there. Higher temperatures and less rainfall are leading to desertification, so they're seeing more of their ecosystem become a desert.
Now we have Nehru World School in India, and they created posters about the difference between weather and climate and how human activities are increasing the greenhouse gas effect.
And students from Kossuth Lajos Gymnasium in Hungary, they learned about feedback loops and how climate change is affecting ecosystems around the world. And you can see on their blackboard there that they're actually drawing out a feedback loop, which is fantastic.
And then we've got students from CM High School, who I know are here today, and they explored how different ecosystems around the world are being affected by climate change. Well done, everyone.
And we've got a school from Egypt, so students from Hassan Ben Thabit Governmental Language School visited National Park, which is home to the largest mangrove forest in the Red Sea. And they went there to see why mangroves are so important for the marine ecosystem. You can see they wrote a fantastic report here, which I really, really enjoyed reading and learning all about mangroves.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to what scientists are being studied. So scientists from around the world are monitoring climate change all of the time, and they work together to produce a report. And this report is produced roughly every 6 years, and it's called the IPCC Assessment Report. And countries from all around the world gather together at meetings called COP, and they discuss the findings in these assessment reports.
So the most recent assessment report came out last year in 2021, but they've added new research and findings this year because they're always finding out new things as they do more research. And one of the things the report looked at was climate losses.
So all of the scientists now agree that all of the world's ecosystems are being affected by climate change, but some areas will be affected more than others.
So some of those ecosystems that they think will be affected more than others are the ones that you can see on the screen. So the Arctic tundra, tropical rainforests, the boreal forest, the Arctic, coastal wetlands and coral reefs.
So the big question we'd like to explore today with you is which ecosystem you think will be most affected. So let's learn a little bit more about each one.
So we'll start with the Arctic tundra. It's found in countries such as Canada, Iceland and Norway. The Arctic tundra has something called permafrost, which is a permanently frozen layer on or under the Earth's surface. So it's the organic matter, so soils, gravel and sand, which is frozen together or bound together by ice. To be classed as permafrost, it has to be frozen for at least 2 years. But rising temperatures are causing the permafrost to melt, and this is releasing CO2, so a greenhouse gas, into the atmosphere. And additionally, once the permafrost melts, that frozen organic matter is unfrozen, and that allows microbes, tiny little organisms, to consume that now unfrozen organic matter. And when they do this, they produce methane as a byproduct, which is then also released into the atmosphere. And methane is also a greenhouse gas, which contributes to climate change.
Now we've got our tropical rainforests. Now, rainforests are very, very important to us and to the planet generally. They produce about 20% of our oxygen, and they are the oldest living ecosystems on Earth. And because of that, they support a diverse range of species, and they're home to half of the world's plants and animals. Now, rainforests are very, very important in terms of climate change too, because tropical rainforests are so moist and warm that they produce as much as 75% of their own rain through evaporation and transpiration. So they perform vital functions to help regulate the planet's climate. They act like giant humidifiers or air conditioning units. And they take the water and the energy from the ground and they take it into the leaves, and they basically make the air very, very moist. They also provide shade. They store huge amounts of carbon dioxide, and they absorb massive amounts of solar radiation. So they are doing this fantastic job for us. But unfortunately, deforestation is really, really affecting the tropical rainforests. And the rainforests themselves are starting to suffer from the increased temperatures. So we're already seeing things like tree leaf wilt occurring in the tropical rainforests. And when conditions become too dry, we're seeing mass forest fires.
So the boreal forest is found in colder parts of the world, but they too are getting warmer. Now these forests, even though, as you can see in the pictures, they're often very cold and snowy, they rely on fires to rejuvenate. So that's a natural process where fires come in and remove some of the thick forest floor. And this allows new growth from new trees and plants to grow. But the problem is, with climate change, these fires are becoming more intense and happening more frequently. So that means that the new forest doesn't have time to grow and form new habitats for animals to live there. And the warmer temperatures are also enabling species to move. So species of tree-eating insects that originally lived further south are now able to move up to the boreal forest and live there. And that's causing damage or destroying the trees. And the warmer temperatures mean these insects can also survive for longer. So again, there's more time for them to destroy or damage the trees.
And now we're looking at the Arctic. Now, in short, the Arctic is melting. For the first time since records began on the 12th of July 2012, nearly 100% of the Arctic sheet was melting all at one time. And since that time, we have had more incidents like these. We reckon, or scientists think, that we've lost about a third of its volume over the past 2 decades. And it's mainly been in a decrease in multi-year ice. So this is the ice that we hope remains from year to year, rather than the seasonal ice that we expect to come and go each year. A recent report took satellite images from 2018 to 2021. And they worked out that the ice that they were monitoring had thinned by nearly 0.5 metre in just that 3-year time period. So we're seeing a very, very rapid melting of the Arctic. Scientists currently think that summer sea ice could disappear as early as 2040. And this is really bad news for mammals like polar bears and for creatures like walruses who need the summer sea ice to survive.
Coastal wetlands are experiencing more frequent droughts and storms as a result of climate change. And this means that they are being damaged. And the rising sea levels predicted in the future could also submerge these coastal wetlands. Additionally, the plant species that grow in coastal wetlands can help protect our towns and villages from storm surges and from flooding as well. So the roots of the trees can help break up the power of the waves before they reach our towns and villages. But if these species are destroyed by rising sea levels or more frequent and intense storms, this could significantly reduce or remove the protection that coastal towns and villages have from these species.
So coral reefs are also under threat from climate change. And two things are happening for the coral reefs. We're seeing warming seas. So sea temperatures in many tropical regions have increased by almost 1 degree over the past 100 years. So that might not sound very much, but to a coral, it basically means that it's taking the warmth of the sea beyond its thermal tolerance. So that's the amount of temperature it is able to withstand. And if we go above a coral's thermal tolerance, their photosynthetic symbionts basically die, and then the coral can't survive. So we're seeing sea temperatures increase, and we're also seeing more CO2 in the air, which is then leading to the sea's acid levels to increase. So the seas are becoming more acidic, and those two things combine to lead to coral bleaching. And corals are very important. They support sponges, oysters, clams, crabs, a multitude of fish. And they're also very important to the local communities who use them for jobs and food and medicine, and they protect the coastline from storms. So corals are very, very important, and they're very, very definitely under threat. We've seen mass coral extinctions occur. I think the first mass extinction event was recorded in about 1998, but we're seeing more of those occur each year. And scientists estimate that in the next few decades, we're basically going to see a mass extinction event occur every year.
So now we've had the facts for each of those 6 ecosystems, we would really like to know which ecosystem you think is most at risk from climate change. So a link is currently being posted in the chat, and please click on that link to cast your vote. So have a think. Is it going to be the Arctic tundra, the boreal forest, the tropical rainforest, the Arctic, coastal wetlands, or coral reefs that you think is most at risk from climate change?
Okay, so get thinking, get voting, and then click on that link and let us know what you think.
So we can see that there's some votes coming through.
Okay, we're going to wait on our team of experts who are rapidly scribbling to let us know what's going on screen now.
So the Arctic so far looks like it's got the most votes. You haven't yet cast your vote. Have a think, which ecosystem is it going to be? You can see that there's one for the Arctic tundra as well. That permafrost that's melting. And one for the boreal forest as well.
Okay, so there is 3 ecosystems fighting it out at the moment.
Oh, there's quite a few for the Arctic, so far we think that is the one that most of you think is the most at risk from climate change. And the votes just come in for the coral reefs as well. Keep voting if you haven't already. Well, we've got another one for the Arctic as well. So I think from that, we can tell that the Arctic is the one that most of you think is most at risk from climate change, closely followed by coral reefs. And then we had a vote for the Arctic tundra and the boreal forest as well.
Excellent. Right, you can still keep voting, but we'd really like you now to switch your thoughts to thinking about which of these ecosystems you would miss the most. So if we aren't able to get climate change under control and damage does occur permanently to these ecosystems, which one would you miss the most? So again, get voting in your classes and let us know your thoughts.
So is it going to be the Arctic tundra, the tropical rainforest, the boreal forest, the Arctic coastal wetlands, or coral reefs, which you would miss the most? So it might be a different vote to what you've just voted for. The habitat or ecosystem that you think is most at risk from climate change.
So there should be a new link appearing in your chat now, so you can make your vote for which one you think you would miss the most. And I can see some votes coming in. It looks as though there's votes for 2. So we have votes for coral reefs and for rainforests.
Which one would you miss the most, Jo, do you think?
Well, I was very lucky enough when I was much younger to go to a rainforest, and I thought that was an absolutely beautiful environment, very dangerous though.
Interesting. I think I would miss coral reefs the most, because when I was a child I used to see all these amazing documentaries about coral reefs, and I was fascinated by all the colourful different species that would live there.
Well, I think the rainforest is the one that everybody who's voted so far is going to miss the most. And then we've got a mention for coral reefs and the coastal wetland.
So keep casting those votes if you've not already.
I wonder if the reason that we feel particularly passionate about those things is because we've had a chance to experience them.
Perhaps, yeah, sometimes it's experience them, isn't it, before you learn to care for them. We've had another vote for the coral reefs as well, but so far it looks like the rainforest is still the one that people are going to miss the most.
Well, as it contains over half of the world's plants and animals, I think they would certainly miss it the most too.
Oh, we've had another vote for the coral reef as well, but the rainforest is still just inching ahead.
Excellent. So I think the rainforest got that one.
I think it did. Interesting, it was different to the vote that we had before where the Arctic. So now it's time to meet our panel of experts who have kindly agreed to answer any questions or concerns you might have over climate losses.
Well, hello everyone. It's a real pleasure to be able to participate in this panel today. So my name is Douglas Halliday. I work in the physics department at Durham University, and I investigate solar energy, solar panels and renewable energy systems.
My name is Tom Bray. I'm a carbon and energy projects officer at Durham County Council. I'm a mechanical engineer and a chartered environmentalist, and I work on projects to reduce emissions across County Durham.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Glenn McGregor. I'm in the Department of Geography here at Durham University. I teach and do research about weather and climate, and I'm particularly interested in the relationship between weather, climate and human health. And I'm also interested in the climate of cities.
Hi everyone, my name is Chris Stokes. I'm also from the Geography Department, and I teach and do research about snow and ice, particularly ice. So I'm interested in Arctic and Antarctic environments, climate change and how glaciers are melting and contributing to sea level rise.
To the panel, if you go back to the chat, and if you'd like to post them any questions that you might have about what we've discussed so far about climate losses.
So we'll give you a couple of minutes to think of your questions and to post them in the chat.
We will then pose these questions to the panel a little bit later on in the conference.
So perhaps you've got a question about the Arctic tundra or the tropical rainforest or one of the other ecosystems we've just looked at. Perhaps it's a question about another ecosystem or a more general question about climate change.
So we're going to give you just a few moments as a class to think about that and to post your questions. And then we're going to move on and we're going to talk about nature versus technology in climate solutions.
It's not all doom and gloom out there. There's lots of people working really, really hard to come up with lots of solutions. So you can see there's some great questions coming in, which I know our panel of experts will be really looking forward to answering later in the conference.
Okay, so we're now going to move on to our climate solutions part of the conference. And we're going to look at nature versus technology.
So I'm Team Tech because I believe that the answer to climate change is in the hands of humans and technology. Over the course of my lifetime, I've seen a massive change in the technology that's available, and I keep seeing really interesting and exciting innovations in technology. So I think it is the solution to climate change.
Whereas I'm representing Mother Earth. And I believe that Mother Earth has the solutions to climate change. Mother Earth has been keeping our climate in balance for millennia, and it's only due to the activities of humans that it's now at risk. So I think that if we just nurture and protect nature, we will stand the best chance against climate change.
See, I'm not sure. So I've got some examples of the best technology out there that's being used against to help tackle climate change to prove you wrong. So we've got kite energy drones. They're a technology solution. And they've found that wind over 500 meters high up above the Earth's surface is stronger and more consistent. So a kite energy drone is basically like a mini wind turbine. And as you can see in the pictures, it floats above 500 meters in the air and creates electricity using the wind. And it's attached to the ground by a cable, so it doesn't float away. So it's a really clever and innovative way of creating electricity. My next example is solar-powered aircraft. I love the look of these, they're really cool. So in 2016, Solar Impulse became the first aeroplane to fly around the world powered only by the sun. And engineers are continuing to build and test these solar-powered aeroplanes. So maybe one day you'll be flying on a passenger plane which will be powered by solar. My last example is hydrogen buses. So perhaps you've seen hydrogen buses where you live. I know that they're being rolled out in different places around the world. So hydrogen can be used as a fuel alternative to power buses. If you have a look around your classroom, perhaps you can see some bottles of water or a tap, and hydrogen is found in water. So perhaps you've heard the chemical symbol H2O. So the H2 stands for 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen. And unlike when we burn petrol and diesel to power transport, when we use hydrogen to produce electricity to power the transport, it produces no carbon emissions. So do you think you can beat me?
Well, I think all of your examples are really, really good, Team Tech, but most of them are designed to maintain the lifestyle of humans. Okay, so they're not actually dealing with the problem at source. They're just enabling you to do what you like to do. Whereas I think you need to look to nature to find the real solution. And people are doing so all over the world. So here we have an example of mangrove forest planting. So the mangrove tree is the only one who can survive in this particular environment. And the tree itself will absorb carbon dioxide, but not only that, because it can grow in salt water and its roots exist below the level of the water, it binds the sand and the mud together. So when the increased storm surges occur, it is protecting coastal towns and villages from flooding. Not only that, but it creates a new habitat as well. And we're seeing species all around the world being affected by climate change. Whereas if we start doing things like planting our mangroves, then that will help all of the creatures that rely on those habitats to survive as well. And here, it's not just on the land where I try very, very hard to maintain the climate. It's also in the seas. And we've got an example here of algae. So algae captures more carbon than any other plant, including the tree, and it takes up a lot less space as well. Okay, and algae, what it will do is it will absorb carbon dioxide, and when it dies it will float down to the bottom of the ocean floor where it will trap it permanently. And it's not only algae that works in the seas, we've also got things like seaweed, and there's lots of schemes out there at the moment to increase seaweed and seagrass and algae in our oceans to absorb more carbon dioxide. And then we come back to the land again for trees. And I'm hoping everybody who's listening in here today has planted a tree or will have the opportunity to plant a tree in the future, because trees store massive amounts of carbon in their leaves and their trunks. And even when they die, they continue to store carbon and take it down into the ground. And they store carbon for hundreds of years. So they are a very long-term solution to the climate change problem.
Do you know what? I think we're not going to be able to decide this ourselves. So if you have a technology solution that's used in your country, you want to help me, Team Tech, please post it in the chat so that we can see some more great examples of how technology is being used to tackle climate change.
And if you know or have been involved in any nature-based solutions or protection of nature, please again pop it in the chat, noting your school and country.
What we would like now is perhaps you are still undecided whether you want to trust technology or nature. So if you have any questions on climate solutions that you'd like to ask our expert panel, please pop them into the chat.
Okay, so we're going to be moving on to our expert panel soon. We're going to begin with your questions on climate losses, and then we're going to move on to your questions on climate solutions. And hopefully together that information will help you decide whether you're going to put your faith in technology or whether you're going to trust to nature.
If you're posting a question, don't forget to pop your school name down so that we can read out your school name when we ask the question to the expert panel as well. Okay, so I think we will go over to our expert panel, who I know are ready to answer your questions. Okay, so we've got a question from Futures Hurghada Language School, and they say, what ecosystem do you think is influenced by climate change the most?
Well, I might be biased here because I'm a glaciologist and I study the Arctic, but I do think as climate warms around the world, that icy parts of the world, those frozen parts of the world, are going to be some of the most sensitive. So we know, for example, if we measure the extent of the ice that's frozen on the ocean in the Arctic, we know that that's thinning and that's retreating every year, and it might disappear altogether in the summer in the next few decades. We also know that glaciers all around the world are also melting because of climate change. So I think some of the icy environments, we heard about permafrost earlier as well in the Arctic, anywhere on the planet where we have ice up in the mountains or at the North Pole or the South Pole, I think they're really being affected. And you might think that we don't need to worry about that because you live thousands of miles away from the poles. But of course, when the ice melts, it leads to sea level rise. So every country that has a coastline will be affected by the ice melting in those very distant environments.
Yeah, and just to add to that, if you look at the rate of temperature change, for example, across the Earth's surface, some of the greatest rates of temperature change are in the areas which Chris has just referred to, the polar regions, both in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. So really rapid changes of temperature in those high latitude areas.
Okay, we've got another question now from CM High School, and they ask, how are different species evolving to climate change? Are they evolving to accommodate climate change?
That's a really good question. And, you know, over many hundreds of thousands of years, humans have evolved and adapted to the changing climate, and animal and plant species do the same. The big question is, can animal and plant communities evolve quick enough to cope with changing conditions. The evidence suggests that they can't. So there are possibly, we are facing the extinction of several key species. So you can evolve in terms of changing your genetic makeup, or you can evolve in terms of adapting to a new environment. But I think the short answer is the rate at which animals and plant species can evolve is much slower than the rate needed to keep up with climate change.
Maybe I can say something about polar bears as well, because polar bears live in the Arctic and they are a species that we know are being forced to adapt. So usually the polar bears hunt seals for their food off the sea ice that's frozen. They use that as a platform to hunt. And unfortunately, that sea ice is melting and it's thinning, and they can't hunt the seals anymore and they can't get their food. So they've been forced to adapt and choose new food to eat. And that means often staying on land, staying on islands, perhaps having to eat birds' eggs or smaller foxes. And that's not giving them enough energy then to survive. So there's a lot of concern at the moment that some of these really iconic species around the world are being affected by climate change. I think polar bears is one of those species that we're doing a lot of research on at the moment to see how they might adapt, and they're having to swim more to find their food as well. They're having to sometimes go into villages and towns in the Arctic and go through people's waste, which then means that they have clashes between humans and polar bears, and then some accidentally get shot and things like this. So we're already seeing some animals having to change their behavior, and it looks like that they can't adapt quickly enough. So I agree with what Glenn said there. There are already some animals that are likely to go extinct in the future.
Thank you. We've got lots of questions on climate losses coming in, so schools, don't forget to post your questions on climate solutions into the chat as well. But panel, we've got a question from BCCIS from East Egypt, and they ask, which countries are most affected by climate change?
Different countries will be affected in different ways. Some of the countries in the subtropics are experiencing the effects of an increase in extreme temperatures, which has an impact on human health. So many countries across the subtropical regions, which already have a very harsh climate. So, for example, if you take Egypt, often experiences temperatures in the high 40s, which is a real challenge, not only for us humans, but also for animal and plant species as well. And of course, going back to the high latitudes, the Arctic especially, some of those countries across the Arctic regions are experiencing rapid changes as well. So not only changing temperature patterns, but changing rainfall or precipitation patterns. And as probably Chris can talk about, some of those precipitation changes are in the form of changes from snowfall to rainfall.
And I would also add, as somebody interested in looking at sea level rise, that I think any country which is low lying and has a coastline close to sea level, they will be some of the worst affected. And actually, at the Conference of the Parties meeting in Egypt, which starts at the weekend, there's going to be a lot of discussion, particularly from those nations, particularly what's known as small island states, perhaps in the South Pacific, but anywhere with a low-lying coastline where they have people living close to sea level. They're really wanting to talk to the other countries who are causing the greenhouse gas emissions and trying to really persuade them that they must stop those emissions to protect these small islands.
Thank you, panel. Okay, we have another question. This one is from Futura's Hurada Language School, and they ask, what are the main topics we need to discuss to help sort climate change? So where should we be focusing our attention?
Well, one of the main topics, of course, is how do we decrease our emissions of these very dangerous gases. So how do we decrease emissions from the burning of fossil fuels? That's a really big question which we must face, because over the past 100 or so years, society has become very dependent on energy, and a lot of our energy comes from the burning of fossil fuels, and it's the emission of the gases from the burning of fossil fuels such as carbon dioxide, and also emissions from the land in terms of methane. These are the dangerous, let's call them greenhouse gases. They are adding to the efficiency with which the atmosphere traps heat. So for me, that's one of the really big questions. How do we reduce our emissions?
I think linked to that as well, one of the conversations that will happen at COP27 is how that moving away from fossil fuels is financed. So whether it's who's responsible for emissions and the state we are now, and then who's going to pay to change as quickly as possible. Is that developed nations? Is that developing countries? Whose responsibility is it to change? And who's going to pay for it? Is going to be a big issue to deal with in the next few years.
So added on to that is this whole question of what's called energy transition. Maybe Douglas can talk about alternative energy sources.
Yes, certainly. And I mean, I think one of the challenges we face is that about 80% of our primary energy comes from carbon-based energy sources, oil, coal and gas primarily. And that has decreased a small amount over the last 5 years, but not really quickly enough. So scientists and engineers have been developing alternative renewable energy sources such as solar panels, such as wind turbines, such as geothermal, such as wave, where we are able to use energy that's freely available, that doesn't have an adverse impact on the climate. But the problem is we have to make a transition from a system that is very heavily dependent and set up to use coal, oil and gas as the main sources of energy. And making that transition is very expensive. It takes a lot of time. The technology is readily available. We have sufficient renewable energy available. So for example, the Earth receives sufficient energy from the sun in about 90 minutes to power the whole planet for a year. So we've got lots of renewable energy, but it's about how we create that transition, both in terms of the finance, in terms of leaders making decisions, and in terms of challenging the established system to make people realise we must make a switch, which we can do.
Thank you, Douglas. We have a related question from BCCIS in East Egypt, and they ask, which renewables do you think are best? And we realise there might be better ones for different countries, so they're particularly interested in Egypt.
In Egypt, well, in Egypt, the obvious source of renewable that would be very effective would be solar panels, because you have a very high solar radiation. You don't have a great deal of climate cover, and so that would mean that solar panels would be very easily adopted in Egypt. Interestingly, one of the big challenges you would have is dust from the Sahara. So when dust lands on solar panels, it covers them over, and that reduces the amount of radiation. And keeping solar panels clear of dust is a really big challenge that quite a lot of people are thinking about in terms of how to create special coatings that might repel dust. And in other countries, other sources of renewable might be more appropriate. So for example, in the United Kingdom, we live on the western side of the European continent, where the prevailing winds are coming across the Atlantic Ocean. So we have a very high availability of wind, and offshore there is a constant wind speed that can be used. So yesterday in the UK, we set a new record for generating electricity from wind, which was in excess of 20 gigawatts or 20,000 megawatts. So it's clear that these renewable technologies are being adapted and are being taken up. But I think the challenge is to see how we can make that happen more quickly. And also we need to think about, as has been said before, about seeing if we can actually reduce the amount of energy we use in our everyday lives and decisions we make.
One thing I'd add to that as well is, and I think it's really important to look at Egypt and the UK separately. In Egypt, you'll have a huge demand for cooling. In the UK, in winter, we have a huge demand for heating. So in the UK, we tend to meet that demand by burning gas in boilers. And how do we transition? How do we use the wind power that we might have generated locally to power our heating systems? And the other big renewable technology that will be relevant for both Egypt and the UK will be heat pumps. So heat pumps used for cooling in Egypt and heat pumps used for heating in the UK. I think that's one thing that we'll talk about a lot over the coming years.
Thank you. So we have a question from Futures Hurghada Language School in Egypt, and they say, is it too late to stop climate change?
It's never too late. I have a very simple view of this. We caused the problem, and therefore we can fix it. But to answer the question, to stop or reduce climate change, we really need to take action as soon as possible. And that's why international meetings like COP27 are extremely important. And that's also why international agreements like the Paris Agreement, signed by 192 countries to reduce their carbon emissions, is extremely important. So it is not too late, but the earlier you take action, the better. Climate change is something we shouldn't sit around and talk about for the next 20 or 30 years. We need to take action now.
Thank you for that statement. I completely agree with you. We have a Belmont Community School, and they've obviously listened to what you've been saying because they want to take some personal responsibility, and they say, what can we do as a school to help reduce our contribution to climate change?
I think from my perspective, it's really important to know what our contribution to climate change is. So the first step I would ask everyone to do is to understand what our personal or community emissions are. So for a school, that is likely to be the amount of heat that you use in the UK. It might be the amount of power you use, and it might be the way that people get to the school. So are people driving to school from 2-3 miles away? And I think when we understand the impacts that those actions have, we can focus resources. So it might be that as a school, you decide to do a car-free week or a car-free term or that kind of thing. Or it might be that you really campaign to invest in improving the heating system or reducing the amount of heat needed by upgrading windows. So I think when we understand where our emissions come from, we can prioritise our actions. So that for me would be the first step that we should take.
Sorry, another way to look at that is just, what do we consume? What do we use on a daily basis, and how much? Because both those questions, what we consume and how much consume, relate to our personal level of emissions of greenhouse gases back into the environment. So our consumption patterns are very, very important.
Yes, I was just going to say, if you look online, you'll find lots of tools available that enable you to estimate your individual personal carbon footprint based on a range of different choices that you make: lifestyle, what you eat, how you travel, the clothes you wear, and so on. So if you're interested, you can find that, and it might be an interesting activity to see how you might go about reducing your individual carbon footprint.
And one of those tools is available at www.climatefriendlyschools.org.uk. So if you're really interested in knowing about your school community's footprint, have a look at that website.
So we're going to finish with our expert panel with a brilliant question from Seaham High School. And they say, will we have additional knowledge in the future to help us combat climate change?
Yes, we will. So universities are places where people come and learn about different subjects, about different topics, but universities are also places where we produce new knowledge and new insights through research, through activities, through talking to people, through experiments, through field work. So yes, we will always have new knowledge available in the future, which we will be able to use, which I think is very positive. But I would also say that many of the technologies that we are now adopting as solutions to climate change, we have known about for maybe 20, 30, 40 years. So I think it's important also to think about how the pace of change can be accelerated in the future.
I would really agree with that, and I think there's no reason to delay change just because there might be a slightly better or a drastically better solution in the future. And we have the technologies we need to make the change now, and the quicker we can deploy them, the better it will be ultimately for all of us as we limit climate change.
And also, I think you need to think about, as people at school, what you can do to help increase knowledge. So you can do that, and this is what scientists do the world over, is monitor or measure the environment around you. So you might want to set up a school-based weather station to look at how the weather is changing. And over many, many years, you'll be able to establish how your local climate is changed. So this is referred to in many ways as citizen science. So what we can do as citizens by measuring and understanding our local environment also helps build knowledge. And you can do that right in your local school.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, panel. I really enjoyed that. And thank you, schools, for your great questions as well. So, schools, now it's time for you to decide. Do you think technology or nature will be the most effective in the fight against climate change? So another link is being posted in the chat, so please click on that link to cast your vote. So will it be Team Tech
Or Mother Nature that you put your faith in?
So have a good think about the questions that you asked and the answers that you got. Which one are you going to choose?
Okay, so we're starting to see some of the votes coming in.
Oh, it's 2 for nature so far.
Okay, so talk as a class, make a class decision.
It's going to be technology or nature. Think about the different solutions around the world, or perhaps even in your country.
Yes, think about all of the investigations that you've been doing as well. Where do you think the most persuasive argument lies? If you had all of the money in the world, where would you put your investment?
Oh, it's all nature so far. Interesting.
I think with nature, there's so many other added advantages, isn't there? You're creating new habitats as well.
There is, but I think technology can be used to help enhance nature, to help us tackle climate change.
I think ultimately we're going to need to work together, aren't we?
Yeah, I think so. So thank you very much for casting your votes. Oh, we've got one coming for technology. Excellent. So yes, I think you're right. I think technology and nature need to work together to tackle climate change. So let's have a look at what has been happening in your schools during the conference.
So we're moving on to climate hopes now. And as the panel very well illustrated, there is a lot of climate hope still. And we know from the work that you've been doing in your schools that you're full of climate hope and you've been taking lots of climate action. So we're going to have a little look at what you've been up to now.
So Edmondsley Primary School in the UK, they designed areas in their school. They looked at how they could develop or improve them to become a more climate friendly school. And they also created pledges of action that they are going to take. And this school in Italy created a Save the Planet poster. And this included lots of quotes to help people think about why it is important to save our planet. And that's great because spreading the message and helping other people to understand climate change and why it's important to take action is vital.
Okay, and we have Collège Colette Bourgogne in France, where each class has 2 eco representatives who help raise awareness about sustainability issues, and there is an eco club that all of the students can join in. And these students are planning to take action, and they have been taking action in reducing food waste. They've been growing their own vegetables and plants, and very exciting, they have created their own laundry chemicals so that they don't have to use harmful chemicals. And chemicals are one of the things that has a massive hidden carbon footprint.
So while we're sharing these pictures and videos, if you've been up to anything, so if you've been taking action, please let us know what you've been up to in the chat. And this school from Egypt, as you can see, they've been creating some really eye-catching posters to show the different futures that the Earth could have. And they also ran campaigns in their school to help remind others to save water. So when we use hot water, it takes a lot of energy to heat it up. So by saving it, we're reducing the amount of energy we need to produce. And they encouraged others to repair and reuse resources instead of just throwing them out. And that's important because, again, it takes a lot of energy to create new products.
Yeah, if we all just used a little less, we would be able to tackle climate change a lot better, wouldn't we?
Absolutely. So seeing what you have been up to has really inspired me. So thank you very much for all the hard work that you've been doing in your school. So I think we should all make one pledge of action here today that we are going to take against climate change. So I'm going to pledge to cycle more instead of taking my car. What about you, Jen?
I love my hot showers, and I'm going to reduce the time I spend in my hot shower to save energy in heating the water and to save the production of the chemicals needed to clean the water. And I think this is really important. Make your pledge, be the change that you want to see.
So if you put your pledge of action in the chat and let us know your school name as well, so we can read some out later in the conference.
We're also interested to know if you are already taking actions so that we can inspire others to do similar. Okay, we're getting some of the pledges through now, I think.
So perhaps you will skateboard or scooter to school instead of taking the car.
Maybe your school can invest in some renewable technology to create your school's energy.
So while you're posting your pledges, we're going to have a think about COP27. So that's starting on Sunday, and this year it's being held in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And last year, COP26 was held in Glasgow in the UK. And Petra Minarop from Durham University is here to tell you a little bit about what's happened since COP26 and what we expect to come out of COP27.
So good morning and very warm greetings to all of you. My name is Petra Minarop and I'm Professor of International Law at Durham Law School, and I'm also the Director of the Center for Sustainable Development Law and Policy. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about what we have achieved since COP26, when this conference of these different countries took place in Glasgow, in Scotland, in the UK, and what to expect from this next COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Now, what has been achieved since COP26, and I'm sure you have seen a lot about this conference in the news, and after that it has become a little bit more quiet. So I will just share a few details about what has happened. Now, as you know, at COP26, some states came up with new pledges. This is new promises in terms of what they will do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And there is a new report that details how good countries are doing based on their current policies. Now, if you look at these current policies that they have, the global warming that we could expect towards the end of the century, that is 2100, seems very long away for you, I can imagine. Now, based on what countries are doing at the moment, this report summarizes that we would be looking at 2.8 degrees warming towards the end of this century. But that requires that all of these pledges, all the promises that states have made to each other at COP26 are kept and implemented fully. So if a state falls short of implementing these pledges, then we would very likely see an even higher increase in global temperature. Now, this seems to be a very dire outlook, and I certainly don't want to end with that, because I think we can do a lot as individuals, and we can also push the agenda forward. And one very important element of this is talking about it and learning about climate change. And I think you've got fantastic teachers, and the organizers of this conference, they really have to be commended for doing this again this year, because it is so important that we keep the conversation going, that we keep these issues alive in our minds, because then we can change our behavior.
So thank you. Petra's video is a full video is available on the ECO2COP27 Climate Conference Google Drive if you'd like to finish watching and learn a lot more about what's happened since COP26 and what we're hoping for from COP27. So some of your pledges have been coming in. So
We
would you
have-
like to start?
Yeah, we have a pledge from Belmont Community School, and they pledged that their new school building will be 100% carbon neutral.
So keep posting your pledges. Evan from Neville's Cross has pledged that he will try to use natural light instead of using the light. So that's going to save lots of energy. That's a great one, Evan.
Yeah, and Edmondsley pledged to grow and harvest their own fruit and vegetables on their own school grounds.
New Bransford, they're going to take lots of action. They're going to plant trees, turn the tap off when they're brushing their teeth, and use less water when running their bath. So that's going to save energy because it's going to use less hot water. And they're going to try and cycle to school as well, or even perhaps get an electric car. So thank you very much for sending in your pledges. That's fantastic. Really looking forward to hearing about the action you take.
And now we're going to move on to Durham County Council, who are going to talk a little bit more about how to get involved with the climate change and how to take climate action.
Thank you, Joe. And I'd just like to thank everybody for attending this morning's session, or this afternoon's if you're over in Egypt. And this slide is the phrase that Durham County Council is using as part of its climate change communications. And following on from today's conference, this is what we'd like you to do. So please think about what you can do on a daily basis at home and at school to reduce the impact on the climate and turn climate talk into climate action. That's one of the key things that we want you to take away from today's session. Any of those small actions that you can take, and please do use the power of your voice to be able to talk to others in your school and in your communities so that more action can be taken by more people. So on that note, I'll hand you back to the OASES team, and then we'll hear from Claire O'Malley, who's the Pro Vice Chancellor Global for Durham University, who's recorded a short message for us to watch to close this event. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, we'll hear from Pro Vice Chancellor Global Claire O'Malley from Durham University, and she's here to thank you for all the hard work that you've taken.
Hello. It's a pleasure for me to formally conclude this COP27 ECO2 Smart Schools Festival. My name is Professor Claire O'Malley, and I'm the Pro Vice Chancellor Global at Durham University in the UK. I'm responsible for the university's international work and for our collaborative partnerships with institutions in many other countries. We all know that the energy transition and climate change are the most significant challenges facing our global society today. The annual Conference of Parties, or COP meetings, organised by the United Nations, are where global leaders get together to agree what actions they can take to tackle climate change. However, this isn't just a task for leaders, it's a task for us all. That's why events such as these are so important. We all have a role in making a difference and tackling climate change. I hope that you've learned many new ideas and insights from our experts at Durham University today. Durham is one of the leading universities in the UK and globally. Our experts are researching innovative new approaches and solutions to these challenging problems. They're taking time to educate students and explain these issues more widely through events such as today's live session. I'm delighted that you've been able to learn from them and to ask questions and be inspired by their answers. Durham University has many degree programmes that teach students about the complexities of our world, including new renewable energy technologies and what the energy systems of the future will be. So if you've been inspired by today's event, then I encourage you to continue your studies, to learn from your teachers and follow your dreams. Perhaps some of you might one day come to study at Durham, where you would be very welcome. So I'd like to thank everyone who's helped put today together and our experts who participated in this event today. And most of all, I'd like to thank each of you for participating. The more you and we learn about these issues, the better our shared future will be. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for attending today. We hope you've learned lots and you've been inspired to take further action, and together we can combat climate change.
We absolutely can. So we wish you the best of luck with all your pledges of action. If you do take action, please let us know using the hashtag ECO2COP27 or by emailing eco2smartschools@oases.org.uk.
And hopefully you enjoyed it enough to come back and join in again next year. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you. Goodbye.